So this presentation is about Roman architecture. The Romans are known for using various forms of arches in their architecture. And if you look at these different shapes, you can see that these are all considered to be arches. However, they're all considered to be a little bit different. We see this one over here being a little bit more flat. This one's a little bit more rounded. And then the one over here on the end is a little bit more pointed. All were used throughout Roman architecture. This was one of the uses for the arch, and this was for the Arch of Constantine. The Arch of Constantine was built in 315 AD and was right near the Colosseum, and it was created to honor the Emperor Constantine because of his victories in battle. If you look closely, you can see that the edifice is all pictures. They are all reliefs that are put into the stone, and they are pictures that would embody or that would show some of the stories that he had from his battles. It is said that when Constantine came home, he and his men rode through on their chariots, and they were honored by the people of Rome with a huge parade. Here's another use for the arches, and this was the use of aqueducts. You will see that the aqueducts were put right next to each other, and then they were stacked on top of each other, and fresh water was carried atop of these arches. The arches were important because it provided drinking water, indoor sewer systems, and like I said, it also carried water to more rural areas. As people started to move away from the city, this became a modern convenience because they didn't have to be near a water source, and they could actually have water brought to them in a more rural area where they didn't have access to clean water. These aqueducts also help pipe water into what would be like a modern day spa. So Romans on a Sunday would actually go to this spa area, and they would have pools that could be temperature controlled, either very cold so they could swim, or it could be very warm so it'd be more like a hot tub. But nonetheless, this would not have been possible without the use of aqueducts created by the arches. This next image here that you see is the Colosseum. And the Colosseum was built in 70 AD, and it was, as you can see, 3 different layers of arches that were created right next to each other and then stacked on top of one another. These were, the Colosseum was used for sporting events, but when they first opened the Colosseum, there were 100 days of games held here, and that would be 100 days of games with an opening ceremony. So it was just a big old celebration for all the Romans to come and watch and participate in. The Colosseum could easily house or seat over 50,000 spectators, and based on your rank and in the culture was where you could sit. So the people who paid the most, they got to sit on the level of the Colosseum floor, and those who had less money, they would sit up on top, which would be equivalent to the nosebleed seats today that you'd see at the United Center. Inside the Colosseum, there were a number of tunnels, and these tunnels would be places where they would have prisoners housed, and they would have animals housed, and they had lifts. So when it was time for a gladiator to come out and fight, that gladiator would get up on a lift, and they would be brought up to the main level where they would engage in battle. Sometimes it was man versus beast, sometimes it was man versus man, but nonetheless, the Romans loved it. It's also rumored that the Colosseum, went too far. It was rumored that the Colosseum would be flooded, and they would have mock naval battles. When it was very warm, a tarp could be put over the top of the Colosseum, and shade would then be provided for the people. But nonetheless, the Colosseum was considered to be quite an engineering feat during this time period. This next image that we're looking at is an image of the use of columns. And the Romans also used columns similar to the Greeks. They used it for function, and they used it for style as well. So this picture right here was at the ancient ruins of one of the emperor's forum that he had created, and so these columns were in his honor. This here is, you can look closely, that would be the Corinthian style column that was used for the Temple of Antonino and Faustina. And this here is the Temple of Vesta. You can see that this was also using the Corinthian style. And this temple here was named in honor of, this column was named in honor for Emperor Trajan. So again, if you look closely, you can see that these are all, it's engraved, and these are all stories about the emperor and some of the victories that he had while he was leading Rome. This next image that we see, or these next few images that you'll see, will be images of the Pantheon. The Pantheon was built, it started construction in 27 BC, and they completed it in 14 AD. This still stands in Rome today and is considered to be one of the most iconic buildings within Roman history. It is still the exact same way, it looks the same exact way that it did when it was built back in 14 AD. You can see that the entrance is marked by a number of columns in the Corinthian style. Looks very similar to what we would see with the Greek architecture, with the pediment and the pitched roof. But what's most interesting about this is the inside, or the dome that we see here. This dome, this is the largest dome in Western history. There's been nothing like it since then. And the hole that we see at the top of the dome, or the oculus, is to let light in and also water. Had the Romans not created this, that there's no way that the dome would be able to support, the weight would not have been able to be supported of the dome. The dome initially was used for, it was a polytheistic temple, and as the history of Rome started to change, it then became a Christian temple, and today it is, it's still used for weddings, but we would see that it is two kings from Italian history are buried here, and it's probably one of the most popular places to visit when people come to Rome. This here is a sketch of what the Roman Forum would have looked like. The Roman Forum was pretty much just the place where the Romans would come and hang out, very similar to the Greek Acropolis. So this would be where Romans would come together for meetings. This is where their government was housed. This is where they would come to have something to eat, where they would shop, where they would, just come and have a cup of coffee with friends. But this is what the modern forum would have looked like during the ancient days of Rome. And this is what it looks like today. So if you ever decide to go to Rome, you would see these ruins of the Roman architecture. And that is it with the Roman architecture presentation.